Welcome, everybody. Glad to have you here for the talent equation, creative strategies for cultivating a high-performing team. We have some real experts with us today. I'm your facilitator, Michele Levy. I run a company called Caravan Brand Partners, and we help nonprofit organizations, including schools and other educational institutions, build strong brands and the capacity to live them. Just a few housekeeping things before I turn it over to our two panelists to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their work. If you are joining us live, we encourage you to participate as much as possible. You can raise your hand and come off mute and ask a question, offer suggestions, ask for clarification. You can also post questions in the chat, and we will be keeping an eye on that and address them as possible. And I'm now going to turn it over to my two panelists who can give a couple of minute introduction to each one of their work, and then we'll get into some questions. So Julie, why don't you go first?
Hi, my name's Julie Faulstich, and I'm a former head and the founder and principal of Stony Creek Strategy. And what we do is strategic planning, leadership development, and governance work with independent schools. And I'm delighted to be here today because I feel very passionately about being more intentional about our talent development in the independent school world.
Great. Thanks, Julie. Allison, what about you?
Yeah, thank you, Michele. My name is Allison Wyatt. I'm the CEO and founder of Edgility Talent Partners, and our work is really helping schools and mission-driven organizations build out their people strategies. So our work really focuses in four areas: compensation, building high-performing teams, so performance management, and then also helping staff understand how do they grow in the organization, career pathways, and succession planning. The fourth area is supporting boards to do all of that work for the leaders of the organization too. They often get forgotten, but they're really important too. And I have been working in schools, education nonprofits, and in the mission-driven sector and beyond in people strategy for almost 20 years now. So have seen a lot of trends and evolutions, and am excited to have this conversation.
Great. Thanks, Allison. We bring a lot of wisdom to what is probably the most interesting time any of us have ever seen across the decades of our career. So glad to be here with both of you today. Let's start with some real high-level perspective. So from each one of you, and Allison, we'll start with you. Love to hear your 2-minute take on the faculty and staff recruitment and retention landscape for schools. What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think it's changed so much over the past several years. I think that it's been hard for a really long time. When you're thinking about compensation, you're thinking about recruiting and how do we build compensation programs that can attract the talent we need. And so we monitor just talent trends in the education space very closely. And for decades, the pipeline of just talent has been decreasing. You have less people going into the field, which means you have less people to recruit. And then, of course, you layer the pandemic on that, and you had a lot of early retirements. You had a massive exodus. I've told the story when I don't recruit teachers typically for the work I do, but we're known in education. And we were doing some internal hiring on our team, and almost all of the applicants were teachers. And I remember looking through all of these resumes and thinking, it's September. Like, these people are literally looking for jobs, planning to leave schools in the fall. This would have been September of 2021. So I think you saw a pretty large exodus at that point in time. And then things kind of returned to normal levels of just challenge. Not enough people, really tight talent pools. And so the competition for attracting people and retaining people once they get there is really intense.
Yep. I was going to say that's great, but it's not.
Yeah.
But thank you, yeah. I think, Allison. Yes. Julie, what about you? What are you seeing out there from your world and your perspective?
Yeah, I would say it's very similar in that I think it's been tougher and tougher. And I think, independent schools, they have tended to be, in a lot of operational ways, more reactive than intentional or strategic. And the thing is like this works fine in an environment where things are pretty stable. But when things become less stable, then that system starts to really break down. So I think in my experience, I started in independent schools in the mid 90s, is that it was working okay. And I saw it get more and more strained over time. And by the time I became a head in 2015, it had really pretty much completely broken down. And then you had the pandemic, which stressed it even more. And I also think that, I mean, I grew up, my mom was a public school teacher, and most of her friends, even the friends she grew up with, had gone into education as well. And the thing is, by the mid 70s, like women had many more opportunities, and that just kept increasing. So then when those people all started retiring, there was not that influx of a workforce that I think schools had been used to for decades. So there has been there's like big macro factors. And then I think the more, localized factors of these schools sort of not having a system and that casualness, then just not being able to meet this moment of the macro trends going on.
Well, and I think you also have the challenge of folks sort of resisting, like you talked about the word system or the word professionalization or some of that stuff that could be uncomfortable for folks who have sort of been living within a certain structure that felt a little bit more informal and friendly and warm and fuzzy.
Yes.
So we're going to talk about some specifics here, some specific case studies. And I think one of the things that you'll start to see over the course of this webinar is that we bring, each one of us brings expertise across a broad landscape of educational institutions. So while we're going to be talking specifically perhaps about independent schools and charter schools, and I do a bunch of work in public schools, this also applies to higher ed. It's basically any educational institution that is trying to attract and retain a really talented, passionate workforce. So just as you hear sort of the examples that we're about to go into, think about how you could possibly adopt them to your own world as well. So we know that each school faces its own unique challenges, depending on where they are geographically, depending on sort of their educational philosophy, depending on, what age group they're trying to attract. And so anything we talk about today, as I just said, needs to be adapted to individual schools, which is what we do on a regular basis. But I'd love to know, are there 2 to 3 guiding principles that you each bring to your work when you think about attracting, retaining, coaching, mentoring, sort of really high quality, really passionate faculty and staff? Allison, I'm going to start with you. If you have like a case study that sort of helps folks understand things that are sort of universally required for success in this work.
Yeah, I love that question because I think that a lot of times people make assumptions about what kind of is the most important thing to tackle first. And a lot of times people come to us for compensation and they just assume that's the source of the problem, right? If we just could pay as much as our peer schools, then we just wouldn't have this problem, right? And our process, whenever we start working with the client, whatever type of organization it is, but in particular schools, is to do really deep discovery inside the organization, talk to teachers, do a survey of all of the faculty and staff, make sure we're doing some focus groups, a listening tour, right? Because we want to really understand, like, where are things really breaking down here? And more often than not, I would say almost ubiquitously, the compensation is really just adding insult to injury, right? What I mean by that is, are people really super happy with their pay? No, right? Like, nobody goes into the teaching profession to like earn the most they can, right? But the themes we hear are things like, well, I don't really understand where I could go from here, how I can grow or develop, or I don't feel appreciated. I don't really get any feedback. I don't really get any like constructive growth feedback. And I also never really get celebrated for doing a great job. In fact, I don't even know if I am doing a good job. Like, I think I am, but I have no idea what other people think, right? Or my schedule is so tough. I have no time to collaborate with my colleagues. I would love to be able to thought partner with my fellow educators to learn from each other and work together. So a lot of times what we hear when we go into schools is there are these cultural issues at play, most of which can be fixed without spending any money, right? It's just figuring out how do we kind of restructure things or refocus our energies, prioritize different things so that we start to meet these needs? So my first recommendation, and one of the tenets we have, is always start by asking. Always start with internal discovery and try to figure out what can you fix, right? Even if you have financial constraints. I think that when it comes to compensation, to the extent that things are breaking down from a compensation standpoint, a lot of times where we see that breakdown is in people feeling like the program isn't being administered fairly. So maybe stipends are a little bit all over the map. Some people are getting paid based on the number of hours they take on. Other people aren't getting paid anything at all. Other people are getting paid more because for some reason their manager perceives their additional work is more important and they're really good at advocating, but there's no rhyme or reason. And so fairness is at question, right? And so that's something that we'll often work with clients on, is how do you put up some parameters so that you can make really fair, consistent decisions? And then I think the final piece is just, those two tenets are like, are we really fixing what really matters here? Have we listened? And are we making sure that we build a culture that actually is rewarding to work in? Then once we sort of figure out what we're going to offer, are we doing it fairly? Are we doing it for everyone? Or is it just for the people who like are the squeaky wheels or are good at advocating for themselves, right? So it's the design, the fair implementation. And then I think the last piece is financial sustainability, right? You have to really understand your financial model. And some, we have seen organizations make the mistake of overcommitting and then having to make really tough decisions down the way. And so I think that has to be a part of the equation too. You have to be a responsible steward of your financial resources. And oftentimes what that means with our clients is that it's a hard needle to thread to check all three of those boxes. But what we're often doing with schools is saying, here are the things that really could make the culture a lot better that don't cost any money. Let's really make sure we fix those things and do an excellent job, right? Here are the things that you're doing kind of inconsistency, and let's just all get on the same page and be fair. And then maybe we can't afford to do everything tomorrow, but could we build a 2 to 3 year plan on how we're going to get there over time so that people see we're committed to making progress over time? That's how we've approached it, particularly with schools that have been under a lot of financial duress. And I say that, I mean, I think that is a huge problem that not many people are talking about right now. Funding shifts, political climate, population trends, there just aren't as many kids, right? So schools are under financial duress, and that needs to be top of mind, or they could put themselves out of business in short order. So.
Yeah, and I love what you said about sort of the applying things fairly. Julie and I once worked with an interim CFO who said there should be no sneaky little side deals.
Right.
Like, and nobody does it sort of with any sort of like malice aforethought. It's just like, oh, this person asked and they've worked really hard. So like, let's get them a little bit more. And also if there's no sort of communication across departments to figure out sort of like, I offer this person this, you offered them what? And then the other thing I think I wanted to add to what you said is, increasingly, especially as you think about sort of generational shifts of the workforce, mission may not be enough anymore. I mean, Julie talked at the beginning about, her mom going into education because first of all, it was the option. And second of all, she's probably passionate about being a teacher. Like my mother-in-law was a teacher for over 35 years in the same school system.
Nobody stays in jobs for 35 years anymore. Yeah.
Right. And nowadays, it's not enough to just assume that people are passionate about teaching because they may be, but they may not be passionate enough to stick around if you don't fix some of these cultural issues you're talking about.
And I think that people just have more options nowadays to engage with students and make an impact, especially coming out of the pandemic where you have a lot of online remote programs that have opened up. And so now all of a sudden, if you're trying to attract teachers, it used to be that, well, the only way, if you want to make an impact on kids, you are going to be in the classroom, right? Nowadays, there's a lot that can look so different in so many different ways. And so I feel bad because I feel like on the one hand, I didn't really answer your question because you asked for a specific case study, but you almost can pick any single one of my clients. And what I just described to you is exactly what's going on. And what was so fascinating to me when I initially connected with Julie, you and Michele, you, and we started talking about, you know, what are you seeing in independent schools and what are you seeing in districts? And we're all seeing the same thing, right? It's not like unique to charter schools or unique to the independent school market. Like it's a prevalent challenge. And so while I could give like one specific case study, I can also honestly say this is pretty ubiquitous across the space. So.
That's great. Thank you. That's really helpful. Julie, what about you? What are your sort of guiding principles for this work, especially given the fact that you have the lens of having been sort of on the other side of the table as a staff person and a leader?
There's so many things I want to like respond to just because a lot of what Allison said and then Michele, what you said, like totally resonated with me. And I do think there are a lot of similar trends. I would say like approaching this both from my own experience as ed and now coaching and helping heads develop strategy is that a lot of times because schools are under stress, there is a significant challenge to adapt to the times and also to be delivering the value proposition for the families because schools are very expensive to run even if you have a nice endowment, which most schools do not. And so they charge this tuition that is eye-watering. And I don't care who you are. You can be, a member of the 1%, or you can be, someone who is like worried about the bills every month. You are not writing out that tuition check blithely, whether you get a lot of aid, whether you get no aid. Everyone is taking that very seriously. And so the thing is, so that adds to the stress because also then parents have high expectations and Zoom school opens school up to everybody. So again, there's a lot of things outside of a school's control. So here's where I would start is what I both realized as a head and now when I work with heads is that there is a lot that is actually under your control that you don't think about. And in terms of talent recruitment and development, it's you can think about this differently. That is the starting point. Because again, most schools have this kind of reactive system where every year you kind of hope most people stay just because it is so much work layered on top of the kind of work the administrators are already doing to then be recruiting new people. Rather than factoring this in, and this is where some resources come into it, is that you have to probably, if you're going to be realistic, which is important because sometimes we are more optimistic than realistic, is that you have to have at least one senior administrator who I think has some time protected and available to think about this as a system. Like we wouldn't say about enrollment, well, we'll just figure it out as we go. And if we need a lot of ninth graders, we'll figure it out. Like you wouldn't have like this reactive system about enrolling your school. But we have a totally reactive system to recruiting talent. And, I think there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. And it's kind of a ludicrous comparison, but I also think there's a point to it. And the thing is, a head can make that a priority. So the first thing I always say is it has to be a priority. And then it can't just be a priority that you name and then don't assign responsibility for. And also really sit down and figure out how do we want to approach this strategically, protect some time, spell out the partnerships it's going to take with other senior administrators, and then actually do it. And, again, we all love meetings in independent schools, but the number one frustration, like I just was in a room full of C-suite people, is the fact that it's very unclear how decisions get made and then how decisions get executed. So the thing is, it's about as the leader, you have to understand that, we're struggling to hire great people. And the thing is, we rise and fall on the quality of the talent working with the students. That is basically more or less our entire value proposition. Now, you can have a really shiny building, but if you have a bunch of people who are not like these people that parents want to entrust their kids to, you're not going to succeed. So, and again, we've treated this in a very reactive way, and we've kind of gotten away with it. But you have to be approaching it in a more strategic way, and the head can actually set that mandate, allocate some budget for that, take some things off somebody's plate. And the example I will give is a head I worked with to address this problem. First, like, okay, let's think about this differently. Could we approach it in a more systemic way? Can we create like a program, a system, a process? That was like, okay, I think maybe we can do that. And then, okay, who are you going to assign to do that? Especially if you have multiple divisions or so what he decided to do was he designated the director of belonging and community to be like the point person around hiring. And actually, it was really good for her because it also gave her like concrete responsibility over a key part of the school. Because another sidebar is just so often, I think community and belonging programs can struggle because they really are relying on every other administrator to sort of let them into their territory. But this gave this person like and a creative mandate too. Like, let's really develop a process and let's have it be an intentional process. And here are the people you need to partner with. And then here's a list of processes we need to develop. Then we need to talk about it so that the faculty understand how this works. And then also you have to be intentionally developing pipelines. So then the director was attending recruitment events, even if they didn't have any openings, just to go network, just to talk about the school. And another thing, and I know this is close to your heart, Michele, is that people all have to be equipped with messaging about the value proposition of working at the school, which again, that is something like hopefully you have some strong institutional messaging. So that is not going to cost you anything to just tweak that to be messaging that you can consistently use across the school. And then another thing that's totally free is that this is something I did as a head, and then I passed this on to the person I was working with, is that my interview with candidates, and when you get to the finalist stage, is like the head of school, I think, depending on the size of the school, they maybe not be able to meet with everybody, but if you're meeting with, say, key hires. But if it's small school and you can meet with everybody, I think that meeting should be treated more as a ask me anything about what it's like to work here and a reiteration of the value proposition of working there rather than another, evaluating somebody's qualifications because there's plenty of other people to do that. But if the leader of the organization is like, hey, we're so happy to have you here. And I'm sure you're kind of tired and you probably had a billion questions answered. What do you want to know from me? I generally, that has gotten, I think, honestly, kind of astonishing results. Like routinely, candidates would leave saying, I've never had a conversation like that with the head of school. So I think I think there is some budgetary implications, but honestly, the vast majority of it, once you allocate somebody's time, and then also like encourage them to be entrepreneurial and partner with them, and how can I support you as the head? Like, then a lot of these things are going to start to be able to get traction in the community.
Well, and Julie, that was a great example and like a real concrete case study of somebody thinking about doing it differently and clearly with really terrific results. Allison, I'm going to give you time to think about a similar case study. And I want to comment on something that Julie said, which is, Julie, you're right. Having clear messaging is like near and dear to my heart. And I think what we see happen across many organizations, for-profit, nonprofit, schools, other organizations, is people get themselves in their cozy little silos, and the marketing person's doing a whole bunch of stuff, and the admissions people are doing a whole bunch of stuff, and the fundraising people are doing a whole bunch of stuff, and then the head of school and their team is trying to hire. And at the end of the day, it's all marketing and it's all stewardship, and it should be happening sort of 12 months out of the year. And I think you're right, people pop up when they need something instead of being sort of persistently present and having that sort of low hum of being available. And, the corporate world spends a lot of time and money, and I've worked on some of these projects in my previous life on talent branding. And I think it would be such a gift for organizations that we work with to think about how your brand and your messaging and your communications are reaching, they're not reaching sort of individual populations in sort of individual ways. They're reaching a broad population. And some of those population may be donors, some of them may be families, some of them may be alums, some of them may be faculty and staff. And some of them may be all of those things, especially in the independent school world. So I love what you said about, and I'm going to now coin, from Glengarry, Glen Ross, it's the ABC, always be closing. I think it's now sort of always be recruiting, ABR. And I also loved what you said about the head of diversity and belonging community, like whatever a school calls it, because I think that group of humans, especially over probably the past 10 years, has been really thinking creatively about how do I bring sort of a more diverse pipeline into this work. And what they're thinking about and the creativity that they're bringing to that work can accrue value to the entire school. Like it shouldn't just be sort of siloed and could you go get us more teachers of color, or could you go get us more teachers of a certain age, or whatever it is. It should really be, we need a broadly diverse group of really talented, passionate humans. And yeah, sure, there's like specific outreach, but a lot of the really great stuff those folks are doing could actually benefit the entire community. So I loved your case study, and clearly there's a lot to think about it there. Allison, another suggestion, sort of concrete suggestion on someplace where people thought differently and had a different result.
Yeah. I mean, I think that first of all, I'm going to double click on, I love two things about what you just shared, Julie. I think one is figuring out ways to embed belonging and inclusion in mission critical functions and work everywhere. And we've always felt like we do equity centered people strategy work, but we don't say that we are a DEIB firm, right? We are people, because that should be part of everything you do when it comes into your talent strategy. It's like the, it should be like the air you breathe, right? It's not one person's job. It's not only when it comes to recruiting or only when it comes to staff development. And I think the other thing I love is just, I feel like it's so easy to get into our own heads about what we want and what are we looking for, and forget that recruiting is a double-sided conversation, right? It's both parties kind of assessing, is this the right fit for me? So beautiful example. I think that one of the examples I'll give, and this was with an organization we worked with that does early childhood education, so like preschool services and really, underserved communities down in Southern California. And a lot of times, particularly in early childhood education, you see really pretty abominable wages in the marketplace. So you could be paying really competitive wages and still be like, basically, like people can't afford to take the job because they can't afford to survive on it. And so we were working with an organization in that marketplace and worked closely with them to think about not just what are other organizations doing, but what are your values, and how do we build something that's based on your own values. And one of the values this organization has is around equitable outcomes and preparing people for opportunities in life where they can be financially sustainable and all of this, but yet they're not offering that to their own staff because the market wasn't offering that to those jobs, right? So the traditional approach in compensation is just to look at the market and replicate whatever exists in the market. We worked with them and they were very clear that, treating people equitably is really core to who they are. And so we need to walk that walk internally. And we worked with them to build what we call a living wage floor, which essentially is saying, okay, yeah, the market might be doing this, right? And paying people down here, but we're going to set a floor here, because that's actually what it costs to survive, not just survive, but like be able to have a reasonable quality of life where we live. And so that was something we helped them develop. And really, I think the impact of that was twofold. One, uh, we've talked about how hard it is to recruit educators right now. Like it just expanded their talent pool because there were people who wanted to do this work and simply couldn't afford to on the wages that they were offering, right? So all of a sudden, they have a much broader talent pool that they can attract into these roles. But B, it sent such a strong message to the people in their organization about how they value their frontline staff who really are delivering the mission of the organization, right? And also sent such a strong message about how they are willing to put their values in action. And I thought it was just such a beautiful example of an organization thinking outside of the box and designing something that's very counter to the status quo, but in a way that's really meaningful to their people and really demonstrating literally we are willing to put our money where our mouth is in this work. So often I think organizations are investing like in the top level roles and thinking about competitive recruiting at those levels and not thinking about, the staff who are on the front lines and doing the mission driven work every day. So that was a really nice example of that. The other thing I would say is we talked about how often exceptions get made and how often we do like little side deals and we do something special for this individual because they asked for it or whatever. And another example of something we developed for them was a non-negotiations policy, which people hear that initially and they're like terrified of it. They're like, oh my gosh, how could you possibly hire people if you don't negotiate, right? Everybody must turn you down because like it's like going to a car dealership. You just expect to negotiate, right? But if you just kind of think about it logically, right? If you build a really fair, competitive pay program, and you want to implement it fair, like equitably and not create wage gaps, you kind of can't make exceptions. And the way you end up making them is through negotiations, right? And the problem is if you don't have a policy around it, then it's awfully tempting when a manager's feeling under duress and is really desperate to fill a vacancy or the job's been open for a while. It's just really easy for it to slide. And the other thing is, I will tell you something, this is something this organization was terrified to implement it. Like, again, we're going to lose people. But what they found was when they actually got into the hiring process and explained to people why, it explained that actually what the data shows is that negotiations disproportionately impact staff who are from marginalized backgrounds, right? So women and staff of color, and it makes the wage gaps in our society that we're trying to close even worse. And we're actually really committed to fairness, and we're really committed to treating everybody fairly. And you don't have to worry that we're leaving money on the table and we're not coming forward with our best offer because we really value you and we're going to give our best offer right out of the gate. Our job is to make sure we're giving you a fair deal. You don't have to advocate for yourself to make sure you're getting that. Like, that's our job. We're taking that off of your plate. Like, you don't have to worry that we're going to screw you over. And so you better be advocating for yourself because our job is to treat you fairly. Those are our values. That is our commitment. And it just really honestly resonates with new hires coming into the organization in a really powerful way. So that was another example of them working with us to build something in their compensation program that demonstrated their values and really, really resonated with their team.
That's amazing. And it is such a, when you said non-negotiation, I thought, well, that's kind of harsh, but you're right.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. It's like the thought of not having to go negotiate a job or a project or a car, like, because you go in geared up for battle.
Right.
And that's not a great way to start.
And nobody likes to do it, right? Like nobody enjoys that, unless you're a lawyer, I guess. But
yeah, maybe even then they secretly don't want to do it.
Right.
So I have another question for the two of you, and I think we'll open it up for sort of Q&A and discussion. We haven't really talked about this, so it's a little bit of a curveball for the two of you, but I know you can answer it. What's the board role here? How are you seeing sort of boards having these conversations? Because at the end of the day, they have a fiduciary responsibility, and they have a responsibility to make sure the school is staying true to their mission. So I'm just wondering, what are the conversations you're having with boards or leaders about their boards these days.
Can I also just make a comment about the compensation thing first?
Yeah,
Do you mind, Michelle? Do you mind?
go for it.
I just wanted to say that I think whatever approach you take, the more, like, I think usually, well, I mean, you're hiring people, you're not hiring widgets, right? So people come to you with a different set of experiences, degrees, um, all those kind of things. And then you've got a certain pool of money to hire. And then if you have a stipend structure, like hopefully that is something that should have some transparency to it.
Mhm.
Um, but I think the most important point is it should be a system. It should be relatively transparent. It should have enough levers in it that the person making the hire can try to put together a package that might attract someone who might be, for whatever reason, like maybe they're coming from a different part of the country, maybe they have, that you can say, well, I can't like so this is the pay for this job during the school year. If you also want to direct the summer program, we can then get you where you need to go. But at least then there's a sense of fairness and it's not this mysterious black box, which is honestly, I think, how a lot of schools still operate. And when you end up on the other side of that, you can often then, the first time you see the salary spreadsheet, it is eye popping. It's eye popping what some people are making and then what some people aren't making, on both ends. So, um, so I would say whatever approach, coming up with something that you can confidently explain and is recognizes people's individual situations, but in a way that feels fair and equitable. So I would just want to add that.
And also, and Julie, I would also say it gives people the power to make the decision about their own income at that point.
I love
Right?
that. Yes.
Right? Like
Yeah.
my son is a touring artist, and there is a spreadsheet that says if you drive the truck to the next location, you get an extra amount of money. If you take on some social media, you get an extra. But everybody knows exactly how much that is, and you need
Yeah.
to do something to get it. You don't just have to have been a better negotiator than the person who showed up before you.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And the thing is that takes some work, and then often you got to deal with the people who are all wonky and who are still working there. But again, as Allison mentioned, this is not something you can make moves that start moving you in the right direction in all kinds of ways we talked about. But then, the long-term goal is over a few years, you want to get to a rational system.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
Julie, I would just add it's all about what type of work do you want to do? Because it does take work to answer these questions and to figure these things out, right? And I loved your comment about there just needs to be a logic statement. Like it could look different for different organizations, right? But it
Mhm.
needs to be something you can explain and people can understand. And if you don't have it, well, that also takes work, right? Because people talk and so it's just what type of work do you want to do? Do you want to do the work of actually figuring out your program and developing something that works for your organization, or the work of kind of being totally out of control of whatever happens, right? And what people tell each other, and now you're not controlling the narrative,
Yeah.
and people are filling in those gaps. For me personally, I'd rather do the upfront work and
Yeah.
not have the drama at the end. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll also just say too that there was a period where I heads were like, it is insubordination for people to be talking about their salary, which is ridiculous.
Well,
Like,
and now you have pay transparency laws, right? So even if they're not
yes,
talking about it, it's out
yes.
there.
Yeah, and I
So,
think didn't Massachusetts like you can't ask someone what their last salary was now?
correct.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
mean there are all these things because when I first started offering jobs, I did that all the time.
Right. That
You
was
know,
the common practice
that
is
was
you
common
ask
practice.
somebody what they currently earned, and that's how you
Yeah.
decided what you paid them when they started.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. A
So
little bit more
anyway,
than that.
yeah. So I'll just start off with the board question because I think Michelle, it's really important. I'm glad you brought it up because ultimately nothing happens without the board's endorsement. And whether that's like something that happens after several meetings of deliberation or whether the head just says, here's where I want to move in this direction, and the board's like, sounds great. You can't you need the board's endorsement one way or another, or it's not going to work in a sustainable way. And I would say in general, like most boards want to be investing the most money they can in their human capital and particularly in the frontline faculty. I mean, one of my first board meetings as head, there was a new director of the finance committee and chair of the finance committee, and she, of course, looked at the budget and was saying, I think we're spending too much on administration. Trustees love to say that. Now, of course, that also depends what you assign to administration, and that's things are rarely exactly what they look like. But I will say, I think if you present the case to the board about if you have diagnosed what the gap or the problem is, and also like if you have been given a mandate to maybe kick the dust off and make your school as competitive as it can be to serve kids, it's going to have to start with your talent recruitment and talent development. And that is not going to be free. So, and the board has to vote on the budget. And I think that getting there in premature is very important. But I think it's also probably I think it's much easier to probably have this conversation with a lot of boards than to say, make the argument for why you need a new fill in the blank, you know.
Alice, do you want to add anything to
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that co-sign on that. I think the other thing that we are often working with boards around, I mean, I feel like it's interesting because every organization knows that at some point, someday, their leader is going to move on, right? Everybody knows this. Something's going to happen, right? Like maybe they stay for 20 more years, but like someday this is coming, right? But nobody actually wants to plan for it, right? Nobody actually thinks it's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years, right? So it's like, I'd actually love to do some survey data on this, right? Like, who here thinks their leader is going to leave someday, right? Who here thinks that might be in the next 2 to 3 years, right? And then cross check that with how many executive searches happen in a year, because it would be like, yep, I think my leader is going to move on, but it won't be in the next 2 to 3 years. But there's like 1,000 executive searches a month, every year, right? So the math just doesn't add up, right? And I think that boards often think that it's like that thing we'll get to when we have to. And I actually think it's the single thing that puts organizations the most at risk if you don't have a good plan for what that's going to look like. And we've seen that play out. I mean, we have seen that play out with schools in particular, honestly, where you have such a leadership job at a school, I think, is one of the most complex jobs I've ever seen in my life. It is up there, right? And, particularly in sectors where they have key relationships with staff, they have key relationships with funders, with families, with individual donors, with like the relationship part of that job is so critical. Julie, you were saying we're not hiring widgets here. Like, talk about not hiring widgets in that role, right? And if those transitions don't happen well, it can be devastating. It can be really devastating to a community. And I can think of two examples where there was in both cases, an unexpected leadership transition at the very last minute, right? Now, first of all, let's back up the clock. It could have been avoided if there had just been really good communication and aligned expectations over the like 2 to 3 years leading up to that moment, right? The transition could have been avoided, right? But that didn't happen. So like when you don't have strong governance processes in place, i.e. evaluations, planning, goal setting, and you're just kind of relying on historical relationships and faith and everything's going to be fine, like that train can come off the tracks pretty darn quick, right? So in both of these cases, that train came off of the tracks and it accelerates really fast when that happens, right? So for different reasons, these transitions happen. One, the leader just kind of up and left in one school, and the other school, the board kind of said, nope, you gotta go, right? And there just was not a good plan. Like you don't have a multi-year transition where you can run a search when the leader's there and they can onboard the new person, right? It was very abrupt to the community. They lost families. They lost funding relationships, big funding relationships, right? The damage was so intense. One of the schools, they went about $1.8 million in debt in a year. And now they're taking it's going to take them like 5 years to dig their way out of it. And by the way, for the incoming leader coming in, talk about now having to manage a crisis, right? You're trying to stabilize on so many different fronts and you have less resources. It's like, why not try to avoid that situation, right? And then at the same time, even though we know we can't avoid people leaving their jobs, right? Like, again, these transitions are going to happen. So why not have a good plan for when it does happen? And actually, I always tell my clients if they don't have a good succession plan, it's like, well, yeah, you do, right? You have a plan whether you know it or not. You just might not have a very good plan, right? Because if something happened and somebody got hit by a bus or somebody won the lottery and moved to Tahiti, right? You can look at the positive side, like there would be something that would happen, right? To fill in those person's shoes in an emergency, right? So right now, you just might not know what that is, but it could be a board member stepping in. It could be, right? Why not actually sit down and put together a plan that's a reasonably decent plan when you still have some time to be preparing for it? Because if you wait until the last minute, it's just too late. I liken it to having a fire extinguisher in your kitchen. You really hope you never need to use it. But if you wait until the kitchen catches on fire to go out and buy one, it's too late. Like the damage is done, right? Like why burn the whole house down when you could have just had a fire on the stove? So that's something I think that organizations underestimate in risk mitigation. And to me, it's just the most important plan your school needs to have in place, right? We have all these plans for safety, for fire evacuation. You need a succession plan for your leader if you don't have one.
And I just want to jump in there because I just want to say like cosine, 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 cosine on everything you just said. And I also feel like, I mean, I think like risk mitigation in general is boards need to be spending more time on. But unplanned leadership transition is the number one major threat. And you might as well erect a billboard on your campus saying, we are a total mess, because that's what happens.
And it's
And
probably the most common crisis, right?
it is the most, I mean, right now, I was at a conference in June, and of course, everyone was talking about, did you hear about so and so? Did you hear about so and so?
Right.
Because often I think too, there's some issue, and head evaluation, which is another thing I do, is facilitated head evaluation, are in such bad shape that there might have been like a bad evaluation the year before, but then there's no proactive anything. It's just like,
Right.
do better. And then the head's like, I've tried nothing and I'm all out of ideas and I've got a million constituents coming at me.
Yeah.
What do you expect of me? And then the board is like, okay, it didn't get better. See ya. And I think the other real risk there is that you open yourself up to a head search person basically filling a power vacuum with this is what you need to do. And they may have been on campus for 2 days,
Right.
because then you've got a board who's not resident, they're part-time volunteers. The head is now gone. You might have some internal person who really doesn't want the position. And then you have an expert who, again, is not really that familiar with you, just telling you what to do. And then you're desperate for advice at that point, and it might be good advice and it might not, but it's certainly not long, well thought out advice. You know what I mean? So I
Yeah.
just think that, and it's painful to me because you see great schools putting themselves at unnecessary risk and taking what's kind of a messy situation and then making it a crisis, which is the last thing in this environment any independent or charter school needs, is that kind
We
of
don't
stuff.
need any more crises, right? There's enough challenges
No.
schools are
Yeah, and
facing.
Allison,
Like
I
let's at
also,
least prevent the preventable ones, right?
yes. And I also think, and also it's just like better, as you said, better communication on every level, goals, aligning expectation, and evaluations of feedback loops would take care of so much of this. But I think people they're so conflict averse and afraid of change, they don't ever put the real stuff on the table. Anyway, Sorry, I could really get on my soapbox about this, but I guess I already have. But
I'm gonna wrap up something, and then I do want to open it up for questions, comments, additional discussion. And if we don't have any, I have some more questions for you guys. But one of the things that struck me about this piece of our conversation and sort of the previous piece of our conversation around sort of building a plan is I think you have two choices here. You can either be building towards something, or you could be running around picking up the pieces. And both of them take time. One of them is a heck of a lot more fun and more sort of productive and inspiration for your organization. And I think people think, well, if I don't do anything, I don't have to spend any time or energy or money. And the reality is, like, you're going to spend it. Do you want to spend it
Yeah,
in a positive way, or do you want to spend it in a really destructive, stressful way? So
exactly. Yeah, choose which work do you want to do. Yeah.
yeah, I love that, Allison. So I know we have some folks live here, and I just want to open it up. If anybody's got questions, you can raise your hand, and we can unmute you, or you can put questions in the chat. Um, just because we want to make sure that everybody gets sort of their partake of the wisdom of these two humans.
3 humans. You've been chiming in as well, Michele, with wonderful nuggets. So
I'm very proud of the fact that I'm facilitating and not soapboxifying too much. So I'm going to go to another question then. And again, I know you can both answer it. It's not a question you thought I was going to ask, but what gives you hope? I mean, I think especially as folks who are consulting to these organizations, we have to sort of help have a sort of a realistic optimism about the way ahead. And I'm interested to hear from the two of you, what's giving you hope about what you're seeing in this world?
yeah. I think that what's giving me hope is that I'm seeing innovation and I'm seeing creative thinking. And I do think sometimes we talked about, like, there have been challenges, right, that the sector has been facing for a long time. And sometimes when you put stress on a system that has some challenges, it kind of like most people and most organizations don't change without pain, right? And so when you put a little stress on those systems, it does cause creativity, innovation, creative problem solving that I think in the long run will get us where we probably all want to be. But the the thing I think I'm hopeful that I will see more and more is organizations start to say, okay, that's enough pain. Like, I'm going to say, okay, message received, right? And start to think about how can we do things differently in the future, on a lot of different fronts, right? We've talked about the human capital side of things, but kids are changing. The way kids learn is changing. The world is changing, right? And we have institutions that have been doing this work for a really long time that have been very, very resistant to change and innovation for a really long time. And I think that the confluence of these pressures is hopefully creating an opportunity for some regenerative ideas and fresh approaches that ultimately will be really great for kids, which is why I do this work. For me, it's about the impact on the kids and preparing our children for the future that we all want to exist. And so that's my hope, is that, some of these challenges will help inspire some innovative ways of evolving as a sector.
That's great, Allison. What about you, Julie?
I would just say in general, I love everyone I work with. Like, I am never not delighted. Like, whether I'm, facilitating a class for Association of Academic Leaders, that's one of the things I'm doing this week, or whether I'm doing a coaching session, or whether I'm working on strategy with the head. Like, the mission-driven people and people who want to serve kids are just unfailingly, like, dedicated, good-hearted. I mean, sometimes don't have all the tools in their toolbox they need to face the many, many challenges in front of them, but are want to develop them. I mean, every day I feel grateful to do this work. So I think, all change, and I agree. I mean, there's always pain, I think, that precipitates change, and then change is pain during the change process, and people don't want to acknowledge it, but it's easier if you do. But there's just like a willingness and a deep desire to keep figuring out how to serve kids best, and especially with with AI and the pace of change is dizzying. But I think people are really committed to wanting to to lead and not be reactive to all the dizzying change. So that's what gives me hope.
And I will add a piece, and it's a little bit of a take on both of yours, which is I am a huge fan of collaboration, not reinventing wheels. How can we be doing this better together? And I think, Allison, you mentioned earlier the fact that there's lots of ways if you want to sort of impact young kids and families and education and sort of our future, there's lots of ways you can do it now, right? You don't just have to go sit in a classroom. You could be working in an out of school program. You could be doing online school. Like there's a zillion ways that you could sort of engage with kids and families. And I am so excited to see organizations who are finally going, oh, maybe we should work with that organization to figure out how to get this stuff done. Or maybe we should think about working with this organization. It is not easy, but it is fascinating. It is exciting, inspiring, generative work. And I think it serves everybody to sort of not sort of duplicate efforts in many ways, and also to be able to learn from each other and to realize, and as you said, Allison, and maybe this will be sort of our it's about these kids. And so like how do we, and to a certain extent, education, I wrote some content for a client the other day that talked about sort of a one size fits all factory model in education. Like it doesn't work. And the kids who are not sort of going through this one size fits all factory model are turning out to be these incredible human beings. And I think more and more people are realizing that it's hard, right? Change is hard.
Change is hard. Absolutely.
So any parting words before we wrap up? This has been incredibly, I can't believe the hour just flew by, and it's been incredibly inspiring to listen to the both of you. But any parting words for our folks?
I would just say there is a lot out of your control, but there is an awful lot within your control.
Yeah. Yeah. Get ahead of it.
Yeah. Get ahead of it, be intentional, and do it.
Yeah.
Yep. I wrote down as I was listening to you guys, I wrote down and circled intentional. And I think that that's a big, don't just let the train keep going because it may go off the track. And as one of you said, it could go off the track really fast. And so how do you stop and think and be a little bit more intentional about it? So
yeah.
Great. Well, thank you both. And thanks to those listening today live, and for anybody who watches in the future, reach out to us if you have any questions. We love to chat. As you can tell, we get very excited about this work. And thanks for being here.
Thank you. Take
Bye.
care.